So if you're coming from the hybrid or DSLR market, you've definitely had to adjust shutter speed on one of your shoots. But in reality, if you've used something that's more video-oriented or a higher tier camera, you've probably heard the term shutter angle before. And I'm going to tell you right now why shutter angle makes so much more sense for a video-oriented workflow. So before I tell you the actual technical aspects of this, I'm just going to tell you straight up why it actually helps you as a videographer in real-world shooting scenarios. Because if you're setting your frame rate and your shutter speed in tandem with each other, typically you need to double it to keep a 180-degree shutter rule, which I'll talk about that more later, but essentially it gives you the best looking motion that's more realistic to what our eyes actually see. The issue is that on hybrid cameras or DSLRs that only have shutter speed, if you're setting your frame rate and all of a sudden you need to change it, that shutter speed does not work in tandem with it. Say you go 24 frames a second with the 1/48th shutter speed, and then all of a sudden you switch over to 60 frames a second, you'll notice that the shutter speed is still going to be 1/48th. This will make all of your motion skewed. The advantage of shooting with a shutter angle, though, means that if you set a 180-degree shutter angle with a 24 frames per second, you'll inevitably get the best looking motion, but then also when you switch over to 60 frames per second, that calculation will automatically be done for you in camera. This means you have one less thing to worry about on all your shoots and make sure you get the best footage possible. So to better understand this, it's actually a lot easier to explain it with film versus digital cameras. But the short of it is when you were feeding that reel through, say, 24 times in that 1 second, that's 24 frames per second. Each one of those was exposed a certain amount of time through a rotating disc. Whereas if you filmed in a 360-degree shutter angle, the entire image was exposed for the entire frame. Whereas if you expose for 180 degree, the image was exposed for half the amount of time. 90 degrees for about a quarter of the time. The issue with this is that when you actually expose more and you let in more light, you get artifacting and things like wonky looking motion blur, and when you expose too little, you actually get choppy looking motion. 180 degrees, right where our eyes see it, gets the most fluid looking motion blur, and it lets in an adequate amount of light. The offshoot of this is that most people actually do film in certain shutter angles for certain scenarios. For instance, you can use 360 degree if you're shooting an extreme low light and you really need to make up that extra stop of light that you're missing out on, or some professionals use 90-degree shutter angles to add a more jittery or intense looking scene versus action moments and fighting scenes like that. But more often than not, you're probably only going to see 180-degree shutter for the majority of your entire shoot. So to enable it, you'll want to read the manual of your actual camera manufacturer, but the great thing is this is starting to trickle down into prosumer cameras and is typically an easy to find setting in all of the menu systems. So hopefully as a videographer, you see something like this and see the advantage of how it can change your shoots. Because honestly, if you're coming from the photo world, it might be a little bit of a weird transition at first, but once you actually get used to it, it's very hard to go back to the old way of thinking. But as always, we want to know what you think. Were you already shooting at shutter angle, or are you still kind of a shutter speed kind of person? And as always, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe on this video, and hit the bell icon to be notified of all of our future works, and make sure to follow us on all of our social media platforms such as Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and more. But until then, we'll see you later.